When I was about 6 years old, I came downstairs one morning. When my mom asked me what it was I wanted for breakfast, I said, 2 pairs of melted butter. And I remember she stopped what she was doing and she looked over at me and she just said, "What?" And I was like, well, you know how sometimes when I play soccer I wear 2 pairs of socks? Well, I just want 2 pairs of melted butter. Really simple, right? But she just kept looking at me like she had no idea what I was talking about. Kind of the way you guys are all looking at me right now. And by the time my sister came downstairs, I was waving my arms around and I was trying to get my point across until finally my sister said, "Whoa, wait a minute, Chris, are you saying you want 2 pieces of toast cut into halves and you want melted butter on top of each piece?" And I was like, yes, exactly, that's what I've been saying this entire time, 2 pieces of melted butter. Because the way I saw it, even though it doesn't make any sense, the way I saw it, 2 halves of a piece of toast was the same thing as 1 pair of toast. And the thing that I didn't realize back then was that my weird way of seeing the world would actually end up becoming one of my greatest strengths. Because today I work in advertising, which means that my job is to help companies say what they want to say in the most interesting ways possible so that people will actually pay attention to them. In other words, my job is to get people to look one way instead of another. You see how easy that is? Okay, I'm going to let you know a little secret. Everything is easier with kittens, okay? But seriously, my job is to take things that people have seen thousands of times before, things that are familiar, and get them to see those things in a completely new way, which means I have to first be able to see things in a new way myself, which really means I actually have to be able to see things that nobody else sees, okay? And I'm not talking about seeing ghosts or paranormal activity or anything like that. I'm talking about seeing the world with a fresh set of eyes. Every single day. Now, people say to me all the time, they say, well, Chris, you work in advertising, you're creative, you can do that. I'm just not that creative. I don't think like that. But it's not true. I think that everybody has the ability to see the world in a unique and creative way. And here are 5 techniques that I think anybody can use to do just that. First, look at things from a different angle, okay? When I was in college, I took a photography class, and our very first assignment, the teacher said, go out into the world and photograph the world from the perspective of a chihuahua. And so I did. I got down on the ground, I started taking all these pictures, and you know what I realized? The world looks a lot different when you're only about 6 inches tall. The truth is, the world looks a lot different from just about every angle. I mean, here's what the world looks like from the perspective of a tennis ball that's just been thrown into a swimming pool. This is what the world looks like from a glass balcony at the top of a skyscraper. Okay, if you really want to start seeing the world with a fresh perspective, sometimes you have to actually change your physical perspective to do that. So as my photography teacher taught me, try looking at the world up close, or look at things from far away, or look at things upside down. Or take a look at this guy. Is he really walking on a tightrope? No. He's just lying down on his side above a crack in the sidewalk. So if you really want to see things in an interesting way, try changing your perspective. Here's another technique that you can use to see the world with a fresh perspective. And we're going to see if that comes up. Learn as many languages as you can. Several years ago, when I was living in Oaxaca, Mexico, I was having a conversation with my host family, and I said, what's the name of that bird that says cock-a-doodle-doo? And my host father looked at me, kind of the way my mom looked at me when I asked her for 2 pairs of melted butter, except this time instead of saying what, he just said, okay. And I was like, you know that bird that wakes up early in the morning with the sunrise and says cock-a-doodle-doo? What do you call that bird in Spanish? And he looked over at my host mother, and I could tell what they were thinking. They were probably thinking, el gringo es un poco loco, ¿no? And so finally I just did my best impression I could. I was just like, and he was like, oh, el gallo. Pero Chris, no dice cock-a-doodle-doo, dice kikiriki. And I was like, now it was my turn to look at him and just be like, okay? Because my entire life I'd always heard that roosters say cock-a-doodle-doo. And he did his own impersonation for me. He was like, kikiriki. And I was like, oh, okay, I can hear that. And I started wondering, what do roosters say in other languages? So I found out in Vietnam, they say googly goo. In Brazil, they say cocareja. In Turkey, they say And in France, they say, pardonnez-moi, monsieur, cocorico. But seriously, speaking of roosters and gallos, how many people in here have ever had pico de gallo salsa? Raise your hands. All right, that's a lot of people. Now, I don't want you to freak out. You haven't been eating rooster salsa this entire time, okay? But the word pico comes from the word picar, which means to bite or to peck. So pico de gallo literally means the bite of the rooster. And if that salsa is just a little bit spicy, it really is like having a rooster pecking at your tongue. Here's another example. Here in the States and in English, we call this, what do we call this? A croissant, okay? Now, in Spanish, it's called a cuerno, which literally translates to mean horns. And now I promise you, now that you know that, you will never look at a croissant, or a longhorn for that matter, the same way again. Okay? Here's another one of my favorite examples. In the States, we have these signs all over the place. You see this all the time. Keep off the grass. Sometimes there's even an exclamation point on that. It's very serious. But in China, in parts of China, they see things just a little bit differently. They see grass a little bit differently, and they have signs that translate to say this. And when you see that, you can't help but think, oh my gosh, I should really go around. I mean, I wouldn't want to trample on the tiny grass that's dreaming. I mean, who in here would be insensitive enough to walk all over the grass that's just trying to get some sleep, okay? So see, that's the great thing about learning new languages. Every word is like a key. And the more words you know in more languages, the more you can unlock hidden meanings in the world around you. Now, this next technique is another great way to see the world with a fresh set of eyes. Walk a mile in someone else's shoes. When I was in college, I took a journalism class, and one of the assignments was to write an article about a day in the life of someone locally. So I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I wrote an article on a local mailman. His name was Carl Daniels. And for that one day, as I followed him all around Los Angeles, I got to see the world through his eyes, or as best as I could. First, I had to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning so that I could be at the post office by 6, and that was fun. Then, I got to stand next to him for about 4 hours as he sorted through hundreds of letters and coupons and catalogs. And then we went to the neighborhood where he delivered the mail 5 or 6 days a week, and I walked with him for over 5 miles as we looped a dozen blocks. And by the end of it, I was exhausted, even though he was the one carrying the 35-pound mail bags. And I remember he said to me, he said, you know, a lot of people think this job is easy, but it's really not as easy as you might think. And I can tell you, after walking with him for over 5 miles in that sticky, smoggy Los Angeles heat, I can tell you he was right, and I've never seen things the same way again. But you don't literally have to walk a mile in someone else's shoes to get the idea. If you know somebody who's a vegetarian or who has a food allergy or who's on a gluten-free diet or something like that, the next time you're having lunch with them, just eat whatever it is they're eating, okay? Now, I mean, just to be clear, I'm not saying you guys should steal their lunch and eat it, okay? That's something very, very different. I'm just saying that just get whatever it is they're getting that day for lunch and eat some of the same things. Or if you really want to see the world in a different way, try eating lunch with a blindfold on, okay? Just make sure that you do this with a friend, because if you do it with someone you don't know, they're likely to put things on your plate that you wouldn't want to eat, okay? I speak from personal experience. So, if you really want to see what the world looks like from a different perspective, try walking a mile in someone else's shoes. This next technique is a little bit harder, but it always leads to the most interesting results, okay? Ask questions no one else is asking. I think one of the challenges, in life is that we get used to hearing the same questions over and over, that we just keep giving the same answers over and over. Like, here's a perfect example, okay? What do cows make? Now, before you guys answer that question, I want to give you a hint as to what the answer is. The answer starts with the letter M, okay? So now ready? 1, 2, 3. What do cows make? I heard a lot of different things. I heard some people shout out milk. I heard some people say, moo. I heard some people say, delicious burgers. But I heard some people in here say manure, okay? And that's right, because it really depends on what part of the cow we're looking at, okay? So when someone asks you, what do cows make, you can start off by asking them, well, what part of the cow are we looking at? Because I'm going to let you know on a little secret. Cows burp and fart a lot, okay? And in those burps and farts is a lot of methane. Now, that word starts with an M as well. And manure has a lot of methane. And methane is an energy source. So cow burps and cow farts and cow manures, those can actually be powering our homes. I know you guys are thinking, El gringo's un poco loco, no? Okay? But it's true. I actually read this morning in the New York Times an article about a dairy farm in Indiana, okay, where they're actually capturing the methane from the manure at the dairy farm, and they're using it to fuel an entire fleet of trucks. So it's really not as crazy as it might sound at first. Here's another question a lot of people like to ask. How can we get more people to recycle more often? And most people would just jump to more recycling bins, right? Let's just put out more recycling bins. And that would be a good start. But what if we started out by asking a different question? Like, how can we make recycling more fun? Because when you ask that question, it creates like a domino effect, and you start asking all these other different questions like, well, what do people do for fun? Well, they play video games. What kinds of video games, or what other kinds of games? They play whack-a-mole, they play the little bean toss game that you play at the county fair, things like that. And pretty soon, you end up in a place like this, the Bottle Bank Arcade, where the more bottles you put into the arcade, the more points you get, and it is proven to increase recycling rates far greater than anything anybody else has done. Here's another question people like to ask. How can we get people to bike more in the city? And it's a great question, but what if we started out with a different question to begin with? Like, who says a bike has to look like this? Who says that a bike can't be something that folds up and fits in your backpack, or that you sit on your back? Or for that matter, who says that a pair of scissors just has to have 2 blades? Or who says that a ceiling fan is just a ceiling fan? Who says that a pretzel sitting on the sidewalk is just a pretzel? Okay? If you start asking different questions, especially that question, who says, parents and teachers love that question all the time. Who says I should do my homework right now? I'm watching TED Talks. Okay? If you start asking different questions, you almost always end up with a different answer. Now, this last technique is my personal favorite. It's super easy to remember because it's just one word: play. See, the problem with becoming an adult is that you get so busy with work and responsibilities, and you guys can all relate to this, so it's not even just becoming an adult, it's just life. You get so busy with work and responsibilities that sometimes it's easy to forget to take the time to play. But that's the real secret when it comes to creativity and discovery and imagination. If you remember nothing else from this talk, what I hope you'll take away is this idea of going out into the world and playing. Remember to play games, okay? Play with your food. Play with your hands. Play with shadows. Play with sand. Play with perspective. Play with time. Play with assumptions. Play with people's expectations sometimes. The next time you're in a restaurant, just go ahead and ask the waiter for 2 pairs of melted butter and see what he says. Okay? I promise you that if you remember to take the time to play every day, you will see the world with a fresh set of eyes, and you will be one of the creative ones. Thank you.